Well, we are so pleased to have such a talented and well-respected panel of experts joining me today to discuss the state of our economy and how best we can all prepare our organizations for economic headwinds. Now, we know this is certainly a topic that's top of mind for advancement folks across all sectors that we work with right now. Our discussion is going to begin with some brief level setting information, followed by what I'm sure is going to be a lively discussion. We're going to save some time at the end of our hour for questions, but we would ask that you use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. We're going to use the chat function for some of this engagement fun, but when we get into the meat of our discussion, we would ask you to use that Q&A feature so that we can monitor those questions carefully and make sure that we get everything addressed. We'll be monitoring that throughout our time together. But now that we've got quite a few coming into the room here, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. Joining me, I have Josh Birkholz, CEO of BWF and chair of the Giving USA Foundation. We have Mary Jane Vogt, Executive Vice President and Chief Development Officer at Henry Ford Health, and Eric Spicer, Vice President of Unit Development for Arizona State University's Foundation. I'm going to turn it over to our panelists in just a moment to begin that great discussion. But first, Josh, if you would take a few minutes to kind of set the stage for what our industry should expect in the coming months, and go ahead and give us a little bit of context to consider as we discuss this topic today.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, and thanks to Eric and MJ for joining. I'm glad to see so many familiar faces. I think Cheryl and John, you were the first two I saw, but wonderful people in this industry. And thanks for giving us a chance to talk with you, have some dialogue and some discussion, and grow together as an industry. I just love this industry, how well we share, how much we care, how much fun it is to be there for donors who are making the world an amazing place, and we just get to help them along that journey. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about giving in the United States, and it's hard to talk about 2022 without where we came from in 2021, which the Giving USA report finalized in June of 22, and we will know the final numbers on 22 giving in June of 23. But what we do know is that at the end of 21, we ended the year nearly $500 billion, 484 billion given, and it was the record amount ever given. In inflation adjustment, it was about flat, but it was a record in terms of total dollars. And about 3/4 was given by individuals, either outright or through bequests. A curious thing that a lot of people don't realize is corporate giving had hit the record number. We had never seen so many dollars in terms of corporate gifts. At the same time, it was the record low year for corporate giving as a percent of their profits. So we've seen a continual decline in the percent of profits given, even though the dollar amount has gone up. Real opportunity for us to think about how do we continue to engage and nurture, show value, and a wonderful donor experience for our corporate partners. As we went into 20, I'm going to just move the panel a little bit out of the way here. Going into 2022, we knew giving was up. It was records. A lot of us had our best years ever in 2021, and it was up because really most of the economic indicators were really quite good. In terms of production, we had records in the stock market, some really big growth, lots across asset markets. Corporate profits were very high. Savings rate was really high for several reasons coming out of the COVID disruption. And even though inflation was climbing pretty rapidly, it really didn't set up in the collective consciousness quite yet that this inflation is hitting us. So we had kind of this unique moment of all the economic indicators that we use really in our forecasting of giving, and we watch in terms of their correlation, even some degree of I'm going to actually avoid statistical terms. They moved together with giving, and those numbers were all going up. We saw the same trends we'd seen in the past, dollars up, donors down. That trend continued. As a result, we saw increased giving sophistication, alternative assets, record funding of donor advised funds. People were gifting their profits. A donor advised fund was a quick way to gift that year-end profit. So those set many records. And there was strong growth in many areas. The arts had the biggest growth, about 27%, coming off of a small dip down during the recession. Health, environment, public society benefit, and foundations also showed growth. Public society benefit, I should point out, is what is the umbrella that encapsulates some of the national donor advised funds like your Schwab's, Fidelity's, Vanguard's. So that was a big part of their bump. Community foundations are in that foundation aspect. Now, what about in 22? Like what happened there? Well, in some ways, it's too early to finalize. I mentioned we won't have that data. We're dependent on IRS data, and we will see those numbers from Giving USA in 2023. However, it's not lost on everyone that all those factors that led to record highs in 2021 kind of went the other way. And so if I'm purely just an economist, I would say that giving's got to be down this year. All the economic indicators that were contributing factors to the growth last year were down. But I'm going to go back to the slide 2 slides ago. What I didn't point out is these little yellow bars on the screen were years that there was a recession. And since we've been tracking this data in the 1960s, there's only been a couple recessions where giving also went down. We've actually usually gone up during recessions more than we've gone down, which is a curious thing. So giving, taking the economist hat off and saying, put maybe the behavioral economist hat on, as a student of giving, we've actually grown more through recessionary times than we have through declines. So there's great hope in the sector. So what are we seeing so far that maybe indicate some of those trends? One is that the early reports show that the dollars continued to trend up. At least the FEP report in October, which AFP puts out, Fundraising Effectiveness Project, that this long-term trend has continued, dollars up, donors down, so actually saying dollars up. Similarly, not from FEP, but reported in many organizations is a multi-year pledge hesitancy. So I might not be willing to make a 5-year commitment right now, but I will give it maybe an outright gift this year because I'm not sure what the next few years. We've seen hesitancy before, but there's been some reported hesitancy in multi-year pledging. In terms of the campaigns themselves, last year was the busiest campaign season on record, and that appears to be continuing. Some donors are referring to it as a crowded campaign market, and it's really, I think, a temporary bubble. Places that paused campaign starts because of 2020's disruption resumed their campaign schedule the same time as organizations that were going to start in 2021 anyways. And so we're seeing this kind of a bubble, maybe the animal going through the snake. I'm not going to give too many more details. Some people hate that analogy, so I'm sorry that I even said it, but it might be a little bit of that in terms of the campaign season. Also, grants appear to be up. So all of that giving at year end to gift the gains, while people are seeing loss, they've got funded donor advised funds, and we are seeing both from donor advised funds and from foundations, some indicators, some direct, like Fidelity said, that their new grants are on track to surpass deposits, where we're seeing granting out from those to be at a really high level in 2022. Now, the base of support, we always will see that the dollars that really set the narrative in philanthropy in terms of the high net worth philanthropy are only part of the story, because as donors continue to decline, I often say that every person deserves to experience the joy of giving. We can't give up and say philanthropy is for the rich. And I think there's real indicators that mass giving does have some bright spots. The Giving Tuesday, the Giving Day phenomenon, they continue to set records. This year, they set another record of 3.1 billion. Giving Days, as well as mass personalization and digital, given opportunities to have every donor feel like they've got a personal experience and authentic video where we can talk in certain ways. We're starting to see some real bright spots where we're now starting to scale that personal experience. So long story short, giving was up in 2021 because of great economic indicators. The indicators went another way, but giving might still be up because people care so much about these areas of passion. We're seeing that growth likely still in the high net worth community, partly some bump from granting out from previously donated gains. So that's a high level setting the stage. Michelle, back to you. Oh, and there we go.
I knew I was going to do it once. I had to get it out of the way early. Thank you so much for those insights, Josh. They're going to be really important, not only for our discussion today, but certainly as we approach the months ahead as well. I'd like to go ahead and get our conversation started. I'm going to start my questions with a statement, so I'll apologize for that, and then we'll get to the question. Eric, we're going to start with you, but I have to start with that statement first. We're all of the belief, and I think Josh just gave us some great information to consider. Recessions are not the right time to halt fundraising. So the question now comes, how do you have this conversation with organizational, institutional leadership to maintain or even grow the fundraising operation during a downturn? What's your answer, Eric?
Well, Michelle, first, I just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of this panel. It really is a pleasure to join you this morning. And to answer your question, first from an ASU perspective, we're really fortunate to have leaders from our CEO to university administration and our board. They all really do understand the importance of investing in development regardless of the economic climate. So for us, it's a pretty easy conversation, but I do recognize that that's not the same for all organizations. So here are some things I think development officers should focus on when having conversations with organizational leaders about investing in fundraising operations during challenging economic times. From my experience, one of the most important elements of fundraising during recessions is remaining present with donors, continuing to invest in relationship building activities with past, current, and hopefully even future philanthropic investors. We do know that donors sometimes choose to limit the number of organizations they support during challenging economic times. And the organizations donors continue to support when times are tough tend to be the ones where they have the strongest relationships. So maintaining connection and presence is hugely critical during these times, and it can't be done at the same level if leadership is unwilling to maintain their investment in fundraising operations. We also want to make sure that leadership understands that we shouldn't be making decisions for our donors about their ability to give. Most of the time, we don't know the full details of a donor's financial picture. There are plenty of people who still have the capacity and the affinity to give when times are hard, and we should give them that opportunity. Organizations that cut back on development end up reaching fewer people, which sets them back not only in the short term, but perhaps even more importantly, the long term as well. The last thing I'll say is it's important to show leadership the data, much like Josh just did. When some data that I found before coming in here today was that when the markets dropped almost 50% in the Great Recession, philanthropy overall only declined about 2 or 3%. And that was backed up in the slide that Josh showed. And then also, in 2020, when there was so much global uncertainty due to COVID, giving reached an all-time high at that point of $471 billion. So we need to really make sure that we're sharing with our leaders this kind of information so that they can make well-informed decisions about supporting and making a case for continued investment in fundraising.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Eric, and certainly some correlations there between the information that Josh shared. We're all telling the same story, and I think that's really important when approaching leaders. MJ, anything that you would add about internally making that case for fundraising?
Well, to echo Eric's sentiments, thank you so much. It's a privilege to be here speaking to colleagues across the country, and it looks like across the globe. It looked like there's some international folks joining us. I am in a fortunate position at Henry Ford Health, much like Eric, where my leaders are extremely supportive. They fully understand the importance of investing in the work that we do, in staff, in programs, working with outside consultants such as BWF, and really continuing to drive the needle forward. Much to Eric's sentiments, I would say the best advice to give would be to really show that return on investment. CEOs talk numbers. So one of the measures that we look at very closely, what's the cost to raise $1? And I think that speaks volumes. We've been extremely at Henry Ford Health efficient in the dollars that we raise, and it's cost us anywhere from 8 to 11 cents over the last several years. And if you look at national average, I've seen anywhere from 15 to 19 cents for cost to raise $1. So those things really resonate and speak to your CFO, who oftentimes are making those budgetary decisions, and your CEO. So that really has helped. The other piece, specifically in Michigan in healthcare, because reimbursement levels are low, but we're experiencing it all across the country in a post-COVID world. Margins in healthcare are low. So philanthropic dollars become even more and more important in the work that we do, and we lean on and rely on our donor community to help fill that gap and really be able to accelerate discovery and innovation and research and recruitment and retention and all the wonderful things that we raise dollars for. So I think really making sure that we are sharing that it's now more important than ever, because the margins are low and the economy is tough, that we need to continue the investment in philanthropy. And again, to Eric's point earlier, investing in staff is so important, and the programmatic work that we do. But I look at it as a lot of the significant dollars we're raising are from our frontline fundraisers. And as we all know, it takes 18 to 24 months for those folks to build trusting, meaningful relationships with the donors. And that's not an area that we can cut back at. So again, I would say just really speaking numbers and speaking realities, and that margins in healthcare are low, and that now more than ever is important to invest in the work that we do.
Thank you so much for that, MJ. And what a great segue to our next challenging topic. We are all keenly aware and feeling the talent shortage in our industry. So Eric, I'm going to go back to you, and then MJ, we're going to address this as well. But Eric, how do you expect the recession to impact the already tough job market and the already shrinking talent pool that we are all dealing with?
Yeah, this is a good question, and it's somewhat tough to answer because we're seeing some conflicting opinions from economists about what to expect in the coming year. And there's a lot of speculation that we'll continue to see layoffs across many industries. As a result of the layoffs that have already occurred and the uncertainty that it's generated in those fields, at ASU, we've actually seen a dramatic uptick in recent months in applications from individuals that don't necessarily have strong fundraising experience or fundraising background, but have experience in other fields that have given them transferable skills. And I don't think that's unique to ASU. So this is providing the sector with a pretty unique opportunity to perhaps bring non-traditional candidates into the field who could ultimately become outstanding development officers. And we actually do have a few such examples of that at ASU in recent years. Another piece of feedback I'm hearing from our recruiters is that, especially during tough economic times, the sense of stability for candidates can sometimes be even more attractive and important to them than the compensation. So I feel like the organizations who can instill confidence in the stability of the opportunities that they're providing may end up having the competitive advantage over others. As it relates to fundraising talent, I think overall the market is going to remain highly competitive. I know anecdotally, we have no plans of cutting back on our hiring. And I think as a whole, the sector hasn't experienced enough of a decrease in giving yet to warrant any shifts that would significantly impact the job market or talent pool. And based on the graph that Josh showed at the beginning of this, I don't know that we will see that. So I think it's going to remain highly competitive.
Thanks so much, Eric. MJ, anything that you would add from a recruitment, hiring, retention strategy as we navigate the market?
Sure. I echo a lot of the sentiments that Eric shared. There's a lot of campaigns going on in our market. So going back 12, 18 months ago when we would post a position, it was very competitive. It was hard to get people to apply, quite honestly. It's been interesting the last 6 months, we've seen a shift where our applicant pool is much more robust and much stronger. I think that's due to a few different things. We're instilling in our team, reach out to your networks. We all have our sphere of influence. Let's make sure that to take advantage of that. Stalking some LinkedIn folks, and just really, looking to other areas other than just relying on our HR folks to get people to apply for positions. We're really looking at utilizing our networks. But because of some of the difficulty and challenges that healthcare has had, we have found that some of our competitors are laying people off, even in their fundraising areas. So for us, that's been certainly advantageous, where that's bringing us a more robust talent pool. To Eric's point, we're also looking at non-traditional fundraising tracks, people who have marketing, people who have sales, people who look at metrics to measure their success. Those transferable skills match very nicely with fundraising. The other piece that's so important, because recruiting is important, but retaining is equally as important. We are in a journey as a health system in building a culture of belonging. So really making people feel like this is their home. The mission of the organization is really, I think, what drives a lot of people to want to be here, because they make a difference, feel like they're making a difference in people's lives. And also, we take it very seriously, specifically within my department, but also across Henry Ford Health, is giving our folks an opportunity to learn and grow. And we can't do that in a blanket manner across our departments. Everyone's different. And we just went through an exercise recently. What it means to learn and grow is vastly different from one person to the next. So I encourage all of my leaders who have direct reports, talk to your folks. What does it mean to learn and grow for them? What does it mean to have that sense of belonging? So we can, in some level, build that customization for each individual employee, so that we're retaining good talent, because good talent, as we know, is so important to keep in the organization.
That's great advice, and congratulations on what sounds like an exciting strategy. A key aspect of building a resilient program, and resiliency is important right now, includes that financial consideration. So Josh, what I would ask you to address is, what do we need to be doing? What do we need to be thinking about? And for how long? When do we expect to see maybe that light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, well, the how long maybe is a tricky one to answer, because
Yeah.
I think if you're doing great development work, you should always be doing great development work. But like from a financial spot, the financial considerations, there's so much that could be said, but I'm going to focus on a few key things. One is it's probably actually the three things would be diversification, creativity, and reinforcement. And let me expound on that. Diversification. I would look at my giving programs and not have all my eggs in one basket. MJ mentioned just a few minutes ago, kind of the tight margins in the healthcare market. They're tighter than they ever have been, upside down at many organizations. And we know that there's been a lot of focus on efficiency rates through high net worth philanthropy, because that funds campaigns. But we also know unrestricted dollars are more often to come from the base, which is a more expensive dollar. So counterintuitively, spending more on base support, which will risk your discount or your efficiency rate, will actually increase your unrestricted dollars, and thus contribute to the operating margin. Those are very difficult questions, but I think it's ones that CFOs will get if we're in tune and say, here, and be able to show that. Additionally, other areas would be, if we're talking about our high net worth, who's been resilient during past downturns? Those donors are likely to be resilient again. Or to study them, if you have analytics people, let's look at people that have been resilient and find lookalikes to what are those factors of resilience through maybe community, their connections, their giving behaviors. Targeting some of those daft donors that were daft donors in the past, and we're seeing trends from places like Fidelity that we have highly funded DAFs that they might have a higher grant level this amount. So that's part of diversification, but also creativity. It's not just spending more money on unrestricted dollars. If we want to build endowment, which is a very important thing, a lot of people feel the risk is the endowment is so restricted. Be more creative about budget relieving endowment targets, thinking through what are areas of endowment that do fund towards the budget. And maybe because the how long, your question is how long should we be doing great things, and now you're starting to think, how long is this guy going to keep going on this answer? But I will say the reinforcement is communicate the benefit of what endowment and how unrestricted gift, that's done for you. This is a chance to thank donors that have given to you in the past, that's helping you right now. Reinforce those messages and why there's been value to that. How long? Forever. Always be thinking the donors, thinking about diversification, be mindful, because if we're not investing in that base of support, we're actually borrowing against our next campaign. So I'll leave it at that. How about that? There you go, Michelle.
I think that's great. And I love the how long is forever. That's a great message. So we've been focused kind of internally, and I'd like to take the conversation to our external considerations. So let's pivot to talk about how the economy impacts our donor pipelines, donor behaviors, even pending gifts that we are expecting or are awaiting. People are they're going to cite that the recession is the reason why not to give now, maybe not give as much, or even pause on an outstanding pledge. Eric, we'll start with you again. How do you plan for that donor meeting? And maybe even more importantly, how do you prepare your gift officers to go have that donor meeting?
Yeah, super important topic. And to start, I just want to say that I think it's really important to acknowledge if we really do care about our donors, right? This is a relationship-based business. If we really do care about our donors and that relationship that exists between the organization and them, well, we need to demonstrate that we truly care about the situation that they're in and express care and concern for them during these conversations. And the reality is some people may be in really difficult places where continuing to give or making a pledge payment just isn't realistic. And we do need to respect that. However, there are plenty of times when situations aren't so dire and there is opportunity to pivot the conversation. And I'll tell a quick story because this happened recently, and I think it is a great example of the importance of knowing how to pivot the conversation. I was talking with one of our ASU donors who gives annually to our athletics department as well as the business school. And he told me that he was in a meeting with two of our athletics development officers that he knows well, and he was explaining that he was concerned about the economy. He wasn't sure where things were headed, and he intended to give less this year than he had in years past. Our development officers listened respectfully, but they knew with his position, he likely had plenty of company stock. And so they just threw out there, hey, if you have appreciated stock, one option would be to donate stock instead of cash like you've done in years past. And there could be some advantages in doing that. And so as they talked through, he realized he could claim the full deduction on the value of the stock while also avoiding paying gains on that stock, or the tax gains on that stock. And so he told me he ended up giving more this year than he had in years past because he realized that benefit that was there. And he was so grateful to our development officers for giving him that advice and that guidance. And so I was just really proud of our development officers. They, had that skill to just bring it into the conversation in the way that they did. And ultimately it made him really happy. It's something that he's going to use now for years down the road. And so that's what we're doing. We're really talking with our development officers a lot about how to pivot the conversation. What are the other options we might be considering? And we're just making it a topic of conversation. Just last week, we hosted a meeting with all of our development leaders who lead development teams. And this was the topic of our conversation. We talked about what they were hearing from their donors, if they were sensing a lot of concern, if this was coming up in team meetings that they were leading, and how they're responding with their team. And from there, we've developed kind of a one-page of tips on navigating these conversations that we've shared out with our entire team. And, that focuses on things like making sure we're having mission-based conversations, that we're keeping the focus there on the mission, talking to them about how do you pivot those conversations, much like our athletic donor or athletic development officers did, or pivoting to gifts of estate conversations, which we know doesn't require any immediate donation up front, but it's a more longer term commitment. Of course, we're talking about things like qualified charitable distributions and required minimum distributions for people who meet those age requirements. So that's part of the preparation. We've also created what we call an opportunities for strategic philanthropy worksheet. And this is really something that's designed for development officers to use in meetings with donors who they probably already have a good relationship with. But the worksheet covers considerations that are important to the donors. And it gives them the opportunity to tell us what's really important to them. Things like maybe increasing personal cash flow, or that they're thinking about retirement, or income tax deductions are really important to them right now. And then it covers the various assets they might own, collectibles, closely held stock, digital assets that they might have, life insurance policies, those kinds of things. So it gives us the information that we need, that we can, the development officers can actually take back and then assess with our team internally on how we can help them achieve their goals through strategic philanthropy. So those are just a couple of the examples that we're doing to prepare our team to have those conversations and hopefully make some important pivots.
Thanks, Eric. As we consider that donor focus, MJ, I would ask you to, weigh in on how do you make that case externally, knowing that donors are very likely reviewing their finances, adapting their spending, especially in that kind of major gift category. How do you still make that case that it's still worth investing?
Absolutely. First of all, fortunate or not fortunate, we're in the middle of a campaign. So typically when you're in a campaign, hopefully that is the time when your case is the most compelling and there's some urgency to it. So I think continuing to share that message to our donors about the why. Why are we here? What are we doing? What are we raising the money for? And sharing stories about how impactful their dollars have been to help save lives, to help in discoveries, to help recruit, retain, all the important things, and really humanize it by actually telling some specific donor stories or some specific junior researcher who has made some amazing discoveries. Really humanizing our message to our donors, I think, is so absolutely key. And again, to Eric's point, having some of those mission-based conversations are so vitally important. And I love the idea of having some conversations with our donors about alternate manners in which we can give. In a campaign, obviously, we're looking for a multi-year commitment. And part of that commitment to maximize that, to reach a stretch goal when you're in a campaign, is those deferred gift discussions. But much like Eric, I will share a specific donor story where in the middle of COVID, a very significant 8-figure donor called me up. So again, middle of COVID, his business model, hotels, movie theaters, and gyms. So you had the trifecta there that he was hit. Now there's other diversification, but that was a big portion of his portfolio. So he just said, look, MJ, I'm really sorry. I may not be able to make a payment this year. And I paused and I said, hey, this is a long-term relationship. This is not a transactional relationship. We are here with you. You don't need to do anything this year. We are here with you. Let's get through this together. You're part of our family. Let's get through this together and we'll be okay. We can be, flexible in the pledge payments. Well, of course, he ended up making a payment that year much larger than what the actually anticipated payment was. But I think he and his family just really appreciated hearing that. I wasn't upset. I went at it with an empathetic ear and understood and let him know you're part of the family. We're here with you no matter what. And I think when the donors understand that and see that, they're going to double down on their dedication and their loyalty. And that in the end, it's a marathon, not a sprint. In the end, that will pay dividends for all of us to really continue to build those genuine relationships.
Thank you for sharing that story. That's that had to have been a tough scenario and could not have been handled better, if I do say so myself. It can be particularly important to maintain now at maybe the other end of the spectrum or the giving pyramid, that base for support, the smaller donors. Eric, I'd go back to you and ask, how can organizations develop strategies and execute plans to acquire, retain, even upgrade donors, which you both shared great stories of during periods of economic downturn. How can we go about doing that?
Yeah, I think it's important for, messaging to be sensitive to what's happening in the larger world. People we're communicating with don't exist in a vacuum. They're experiencing what's going on, reading about it, thinking about it. So I feel like failing to adapt can be perceived as tone deaf and potentially, risks damaging relationships. We need to continue emphasizing impact. Survival should never be the reasoning for an appeal. I think at all levels of annual giving during challenging economic times, it's important to communicate how the organization is meeting an immediate need in the community. So just one example, during COVID, we transitioned our appeals to focus on student emergency relief, which was successful from not only an acquisition standpoint, but it also resulted in increased year-over-year giving from our loyal donors. So I think that's really important. Focusing on the increased demand for services can be especially effective. I know many organizations, the demand for their services are at a peak when times are most difficult financially for others. And loyal donors, they typically truly do care about the organization and the community it serves. So they want to know how organizations are being impacted, and they want to know about that increased demand in services, and most importantly, how they can help. And so we need to be communicating to them in that way. Of course, stewardship is always important. Many donors at the annual giving level, I mentioned this earlier, tend to give to a lot of organizations and cut back a little bit if times are hard. So making sure we're stewarding and reporting on impact at all giving levels, I think that's important to do that at all levels, is really critical to ensuring we're staying on that list of organizations they're supporting. And then the last thing I was going to mention is exactly what MJ just talked about, being flexible with gift options. Her example of being flexible with her donor who had a pledge, that was maybe a major gift donor, but I think at all levels we need to be flexible in thinking about deferring gifts and extending timelines of pledges as well if people are unable to give.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. MJ, should organizations, you talked a little bit about the case in an earlier comment, but I'd like to talk about messaging in kind of a broader sense. During a recession, should we be adapting, modifying that message? And if so, what would your kind of guiding principles or recommendations be?
Great question. I'm going to pause for a second and go back, though, to Eric's point that he just made around stewardship. It is, I think, sometimes a lost art for what we do, and we don't go back and share the impact. And again, that's what's really going to engage and create long-term relationships, again, at every spectrum of the giving pyramid. It's so important. So kudos, great point, Eric. I just wanted to go back and really emphasize that because I think it's something, it's too often an afterthought. So in terms of messaging, again, great question. I think, and again, I'm going to look at it from a campaign lens, but I think also just in a general lens as well. I think it gets a little problematic when you start to change your message too much. We don't want to confuse our donors and what we're trying to do. Acknowledge, though, certainly acknowledge the situation. We're in a recession. We understand it's tough, but again, have some of those mission-based messaging around the campaign, around the why, around why it's important, around because during a recession, we need you now more than ever, because there's all recession impacts not just our donors' portfolios, it impacts the full gamut across our communities. One of the things that I hearken back to is during our last campaign, which was in 2007, 2008 period, which we were going through a recession. And that time as well, we seemed to pick really good times to have large campaigns. But we went to our foundation board at that time and said, do we need to extend the timeline? It was a 7-year campaign. We said, should we push this to 10 years to make sure that we reach our goal? And there was a resounding no. They said, we set a goal and we need to be able to be flexible and adjust within the parameters of the goal that we set. Win or lose, meet it or not meet it, we're in it together, and we set out on this journey, and we're going to try and get there. So it just was really profound to me. I was kind of sat back and was thinking, absolutely going to say, yeah, let's extend it to 10 years so we can ensure that we're going to reach our goal. But they said, no, this is what we set out to achieve, and let's not give up before we've reached the finish line. And lo and behold, we surpassed our goal. So it was a great message that our foundation board gave us. So again, I think changing your messaging can confuse donors, but I think acknowledging the situation is truly important.
And that consistency can prove to be really strategic in the years that follow as well. Thanks, MJ. Appreciate that. Josh, would you like to build on this kind of campaign planning and campaign execution timeline topic and how that all plays into our economic conditions? What are those considerations, and should we consider, and how do we go about making those decisions of altering the plan?
Yeah, good question. If you look at the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 decades, and I've been trying, the average campaign length is what, about 8 years. There's only been 2 good years to start a campaign. It was 2011 and 1992. Those are the only years where you got that whole campaign with years of consecutive growth throughout your whole campaign period. So the odds are not in your favor that there's ever a perfect time. And I think that some of the considerations, though, and sometimes the timing can be unfortunate. As Eric mentioned, your loyal donors do care, and I think that's an important consideration. What we found was unfortunate for some. A couple of you that are on the call that I know organizations that were launching, say, in 2018, 2019, they were getting, or at least quiet phases. All their closest, most loyal donors gave big pledges right in 19, and then 2020 hit. And in 2020, the organizations at best got most of their big gifts from their most loyal donors, and they had all just made their pledge the year before. So that was unfortunate timing, and we can't time it like that. It's like timing the market. So what can we focus on? And that is that donor experience. And MJ mentioned this lost art. What are those donor sentiments? One thing that I'm looking for when I'm talking with donors, I ask them, what's it like to be a donor here? Like, what's it feel like? And sometimes they'll say, honestly, it's lonely, which is the strangest answer that I've gotten more often than I care to admit. Because the one thing we know is communities rally. Are you just building a relationship with your donor, or are you building a donor community? Because that donor community is more resilient than your relationship with that donor. I think the concepts of the urgency of your case, especially in a crowded campaign period, that will carry you through, and be mindful of your own trends. But I think when I'm advising someone, those are kind of the qualitative things. Quantitatively, I would look at that mix in the major gift maturity, high net worth. If you're predominantly a mass marketing house, it's very different than your entirely high net worth house, and that mix in terms of your diversification. But that's in the weeds. The bottom line, there's no perfect time. I know many of you have heard other donors say this, but I've had a board member at a children's hospital say the kids don't check the stock market before they get sick. I always use that. For me, it works. It carries me through. The environment doesn't check the asset markets or GDP before, the climate changes and all these types of things. The missions are urgent. The timeframes. I think you should be mindful if you're focusing on the donors. Don't worry about it. Famous last words, but I'm going to say that anyways.
Well, and it goes back to all the things we've talked about with mission. Do it because it's important. Before we open it up to audience questions, I have one last question for each of our panelists. We've touched on this a few times, but this is not the first time we have been down this road. What are the lessons learned that you can share with us from previous periods of economic downturn to maybe give us a little bit of additional hope? MJ, why don't you go first this time around?
Sure, happy to. And we have touched on a lot of the key elements. One thing, though, that I will go back to early in Eric's first response, and we talked about it, and Josh touched on it a little bit as well. When we've been in a recession, donations haven't dropped as significantly as the recession, as we would have expected. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind. I think it's important to lead with mission and lead with why it's important, why there's urgency. And I think it's vitally important to make our donors feel that it is not a transactional situation. We're in it for a long-term relationship. And going back to stewardship. So we're cultivating, we want to recognize and appreciate, and we want to steward. And unless we're doing that in a constant state, we're going to lose folks, and they're going to feel less important. Josh, that strikes me that you talked to a donor and their experience said it was lonely. I would never want one of our donors, I'm sure there's some out there, but I would never want to hear from one of our major gift donors, annual giving donors, event donors, whatever it might be, that it's lonely. We want to create a community that these people feel like they're part of something, they're in it together, and they're making our community a healthier and better place.
Eric, anything that you would add there?
Well, I completely agree with everything MJ said. And just to back that up, the data is there. I think organizations that let external events impact their plans are the ones that are the least successful during these times. Philanthropy is resilient. The data is there. We have to avoid making these blanket assumptions about what donors can or can't do. And the most important thing is to just stay the course, focus on the mission, maintain enthusiasm. I think that's really key as well, maintaining that enthusiasm for the work, and just continue to build those relationships. Because if we do that, when the economy recovers from whatever downturn we might see, we won't be in the difficult position of having to rebuild relationships, which we know can take years to rebuild.
Thank you. And Josh, I will give everybody that moment to start sending in their questions to the Q&A feature while Josh rounds out this question.
Well, MJ and Eric both said it very well. So let me echo and reinforce. Here's some extra exclamation points. Giving is up more than it's down in recessions, and when it's down, it's not that much. That's really important knowledge, and it was really well said. So I'm not going to say more about that. I believe in this sector. I've seen more reasons than not to believe in the power of humanity to take care of humanity. In selflessness, generosity is an amazing value that we get to be a part of and see. And I see lots of selfishness and selflessness and generosity every day. It's amazing. So I would also say continue to be authentically bold. I mean, if you've heard me speak before or read my latest book, one thing that I often talk about is when we've mentioned donors, and we've interviewed them about fundraisers, that the top predictor of a good fundraiser is that the donor said, well, in response to this question, do you think this fundraiser would give the same gift if they had your resources? And if they said yes versus no, we looked at those fundraisers and the yeses were 4 to 5 times more prolific than the nos. Just in the fact that I myself would give that same gift. That's an authenticity that the donors feel. They know that you are one of them. And in a time like this, ask yourself, would I give to our organization right now? And if you can't say yes, you're not going to succeed with that donor. And I think that's an important thing. Be authentic, be bold, believe in your mission. If you're not feeling that way, either find a place you can care deeply about or go and reinvigorate that spark of why you're at the organization you are. You're doing amazing things. Talk to faculty, go talk to program staff, meet with the artistic director, get that rejuvenated joy around what you're raising money for, because it's worth it. Your donors are worth it. Your mission's worth it. And I think we can, I think the donors are going to respond.
They have before and they will again, right? Well, I will say either you all did just such an extraordinarily thorough job that there are no questions left unanswered, except Eric, we're getting lots of requests for that one pager. So your inbox will be blowing up with requests after this, but we'll try and head some of those off. If anyone else has any additional questions, I would certainly invite you to submit those now. We do have a few minutes left until top of the hour. And maybe while we await to see if any brave volunteers step forward to our panelists, is there anything else that you think, as you think about the content we've talked through here today? We did have one come in about corporate giving here. How do we How do we expect that to go, and what can we do to maximize it? Maybe Tina will build on that question a little bit, and then I would certainly invite your additional comments as well. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit about corporate giving.
I'm happy to kick that off. One of the things that we made a very intentional effort a few years ago was to move away from the conversations with our corporate partners around just events. So we are having much more meaningful conversations with our corporations about, what within, some of them have, their own separate foundations or philanthropic arms, but really trying to find out what's the mission, what do you really care about, and trying to match that mission and that need with some programs that we have. So really understanding and speaking to them too, that 100% of your gift is going to go to the bottom line, not 60 or 50% if you sponsor an event. We really want the corporation to be treated like a donor. We want to go back to them and share stories of impact. The other way that we have found that we've been able to engage in a deeper manner some of our corporations, we've got some grassroots fundraising campaigns, and we have the corporations get their employees involved in helping us do some peer-to-peer fundraising around cancer, around other community efforts that we're doing. So a company not only feels good about the gift that they're making, but they also feel like there's an opportunity to engage their own employees on a mission, some mission work that they're doing as an organization. And we found that to be very successful.
I love that answer. The one thing that I might add is I remember the days when plan giving programs were developing, and we started talking about you need to do a blended approach, outright and planned. I think we should do blended approach on all the things. And so that's corporate and outright with your individuals connected to corporations and so forth. And also from a prospecting approach, corporations are more subject to the economy than individuals in some ways are. They're more sector specific in terms of sometimes where their revenues and their profits are. But I wonder if it's the case, like this is fulfilling, because I think MJ's right. If we treat them like donors, maybe they'll act like donors as opposed to it's a transaction related to their corporate profits. So
right. One other direction that we're going into, and this sort of is related, but sort of not. We have recently started an executive health program. So trying to say to our folks, you don't need to go to Mayo, you don't need to go to Cleveland, you don't need to leave the state. We have that program right here. So the way we see that also is engaging the leadership within that organization. So hopefully they become patients, they become grateful patients, they become part of the family, and they're going to want their organization to be involved and ingrained with what we're doing.
That's great. We do have a couple more that have appeared in our Q&A here. So this is a great question about resources. Do you recommend? What do you recommend for increasing major gift officers' knowledge in that asset type, deferred giving benefits that come along with those things? I think this is a question a lot of advancement shops ask, which is how do I give this much expertise to this many people? Anybody want to tackle that one?
I'm happy to jump in here. We've struggled with that a little bit over the years at ASU as well, because what I've found personally, and I think what a lot of development officers find, is there's a lot of technical knowledge when you really get into strategic philanthropy and gifts of assets and things like that. And it's not an everyday occurrence where you're using that knowledge, at least for most gift officers. And so when you're not using it regularly, it's easy to lose it. So you can go through a training, whether it's a day training or over a course of a period of weeks going through multiple sessions. But if you're not using it regularly, it's pretty easy to lose that knowledge. And so we've attempted a couple of different things. Where we're at right now is we have what we call a strategic philanthropy crew. And so we try to have a representative from each one of our fundraising teams be the member of the strategic philanthropy crew, where they're meeting twice a month. And there's a leader of that group. It had been our estate and gift planning advisor, and we've transitioned it over to someone else who participated for a very long time and really gained that skill. And now he's been given the professional development opportunity to lead the group. But we're building experts within all of our units in that space. And now they're taking the information they're learning and filtering it out to the broader team, with people on their teams. And so we find that the longer that we can keep people as part of this strategic philanthropy crew, there comes a period where they're very comfortable with it. That knowledge is retained and they're ready to move on. And then we can bring someone else from that team to now have that experience. So it's what we're trying right now. And it seems to be working better than just the trainings that we've done in the past, where people will come, they'll get a certificate, they've gone through it, and that's it for a year. This seems to be a better approach, at least for us.
Thanks for that, Eric. Appreciate it. MJ, this next question is directed toward you. During COVID, how did you ensure your supporters felt that sense of community outside of the development officer relationship? And was it effective communication, storytelling? How did you foster that community?
Absolutely. I am very fortunate. We have a fantastic communications team. And I still remember sitting in my office when it got real. And we said, okay, we need to start a COVID relief fund. And we ended up, by the end of COVID with 20 different funds supporting a variety of different objectives. But it was really about making sure that we were communicating with our donor community at certain points on a weekly basis and giving them that opportunity to give back. I think we all learned there was this sense of helplessness during COVID and people just wanted to help. One of the things that so there's, certainly a lot of activity around our annual, but in terms of our major donors, I just kept telling people, just call and check in, see how they're doing. We're not asking for money, but this is impacting everyone. Just call your donors and check in. And they did that. The second time they called to check in, the donors were like, what can we do for you? You guys are struggling. How can we help? And we created this feel that people they felt helpless, but they felt like they were making an impact and a difference by giving to funds to help our employees who were maybe hourly employees who were, their lives were blown up because of COVID. So there were a lot of different things. Again, telling stories became really important and impactful to really make our donor community feel like they were making a huge difference. Let's put everything else aside and let's focus on the current pandemic that we're facing that we've never gone through before. And I think we really succeeded in creating that community feel with our donors.
And they won't forget that later. That's great. I'm going to jump over to the chat feature. We have one question left in chat and one left in the Q&A, and I think we've got time to address both those before we wrap up quickly. But how much of a concern is the continued trend of donor decreases? Is anyone having success reversing this trend? So should we be concerned, and have you fixed it? I think that's the two-part question.
I'll jump in on this because, yeah, I'm absolutely concerned. I want to say that in general, because I think for so long giving has just been a cultural value. And there's been a lot of discussions. The Generosity Commission, which is doing amazing work, and I'm a big advocate of the work they're doing. I remember Jane Wales recently saying that perhaps part of it is we focus so much on instrumentality, which is a good thing. We give so that this thing can happen, impact, and so that's instrumentality, that maybe we've started to drift away from the intrinsic value of just giving is a good thing. It's good to give. It's good just for giving's sake. There might be some truth to that. And I don't want to seed that giving is just going to be a thing for the rich. But companies like ours, if we're hired to help you run a campaign, the best chance of getting this campaign done is your top 50 donors. We know that. So does our ecosystem reinforce some of this? I think we need to be purposeful as an industry to tackle this problem. And who has? I'd say we've put money up ourselves, and I didn't mean this to be a commercial, but our First Name subsidiary is really around that with First Name itself. Is everybody deserves to have their name known. That's really what's key to that. And we're trying, and we found success, at least in the university sector right now, in donor engagement, having students act more like Instagram influencers than be on a call center. We put them in a team giving authentic video message. We've seen growth in the annual funds at those programs. I didn't mean to be a commercial, but it's an example of the creativity, like the Giving Tuesday, the Giving Day. Like, I think we need to realize we're competing for attention in a digital world, and that's different than competing for gifts. That means that we're going up against, am I going to see a YouTube ad for Amazon, or am I going to see a YouTube ad for Henry Ford Health? Those are the questions that we are starting to tackle if we're going to reverse this trend. So thank you. There is hope. It's happening. As Deborah is saying back in the chat, show me you know me. That's absolutely true. We got to, as big organizations, get smaller if our donors that are smaller are going to get bigger.
All right, so I know we're going to probably lose some people here at the top of the hour, but I'll address this last question before we beg for you to all to fill out our survey so we can continue delivering quality content to our colleagues across the globe. But any tips toward moving the organization to being endowed, or toward endowment giving, maybe is a broader way of asking that, making a case for endowment now?
I can, really big topic. But MJ, you're unmuted. You want to beat me to it?
I was just going to say, one of the things that has, I think, flipped some of the conversation around that is we are about 2 years into a 30-year relationship that we're establishing with Michigan State and their College of Human Medicine, Osteopathic Medicine, and School of Nursing. And I think there's a deeper understanding and appreciation for what endowment means in that atmosphere. Certainly there's appreciation as a research academic focused health system, but when we have an academic partner like that, I think that becomes much more important, and people understand the value in the endowment.
That's perfect. I don't want to add much. I would agree. Go talk to people that have them. Learn about their experience. Go through the process of your gift acceptance policy with your board. They'll understand that more if you're trying to sell it internally. If externally, look at opportunities where perpetuity makes sense. I'm working with a international NGO in Africa. We found we could endow a nutritionist in perpetuity for 100,000 because of the labor costs in that part of Africa and so forth. We can be more creative about this. Possibilities are out there.
Well, thank you to our wonderful panelists for giving your time, attention, and your expertise. Thank you for everyone who joined in today. What a robust crew we have here on a Thursday. We would ask you to, of course, take the survey. We will send that out after this as well, if you didn't have time to click on it as we wrapped up. And we have recorded this webinar, and it will be available on our website. And for those of you who tuned in today, we're going to send it via email here within the next couple of days. It is a busy time of year, and so we appreciate you all spending a little bit of your day and your week with us. Have a happy holiday season and stay safe, and good luck in the new year. Bye now.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.